Hi, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 17th episode of the story about the time when Sasuke gives his sharingan eyes to Naruto on verge death in waves. Let's watch as Naruto Uzumaki, Uchiha takes world by storm. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The spinning ball of meat was stalled by the high-pressure blast of air. However, it quickly broke through the Zanka and Zaku was forced to leap aside lest the chubby ninja crush him. Kuji continued past him and rolled up a tree near the edge of the small clearing before his stout head and limbs popped out of his torso, then the excess fat created by the jutsu moved towards his arms and elongated them. The Akimichi grabbed a branch above him with the expanded limbs and swung towards the Auto Nin before launching a devastating overhead punch that demolished the earth where Zaku was standing moments ago. The smaller Sharingan had jumped aside and rolled across the ground to get away from the raging teen's deadly fist, and the shockwave from the Konoha Nin's attack propelled him further away. The sound Shinobi growled and pushed his hands into the ground, using the momentum to flip to his feet, and launched another Zanka at his opponent. Kuji simply raised his enlarged arms up for protection and the airstreams only displaced the fat, causing it to ripple but doing no damage to the chubby ninja. The Akimichi's arms shrunk as his body expanded once more and he began rolling towards Zaku, propelled by bluish steam. The Auto Nin jumped above the attack and blasted another wave of air that squished the ball of fat so it was shaped like an egg. But the chubby boy kept rolling and started to turn around. When the sound Sharingan landed, Kuji's head popped out of the ball as his arms expanded again and grabbed the earth, using it to pull himself Zaku. The Akimichi's head retreated once more as he smashed into his surprised opponent and left sound Sharingan dazed after rolling nearly 50 feet across the ground, but even in his muddled state he was still able to hear, "Death to chubby haters." Kuji's massive fists were clasped together as they crushed the earth and log Zaku substituted with. The Konoha Sharingan looked alarmed as he tried to displace the fat to his entire body for protection after hearing an angry voice above him yell, "Zankuki Okua, extreme decapitating airwaves," but a blast of air nearly 15 feet in diameter slammed into his back before it was fully inflated and sent the Akimichi deep into the ground he just destroyed. Zaku landed while breathing hard and sneered at the devastated earth, "Take that fatso." The Auto Sharingan's eyes widened when he heard an enraged, "I already told you I'm big-boned," before the shattered ground in front of him burst upwards as a large fist smashed into his whole body. Zaku shakily regained his feet after tumbling across the clearing and stared fearfully at Kuji, who skidded to a stop 15 feet away from him. The Akimichi spread his massive hands and prepared to squish his opponent between them like a cockroach. "This is for all my comrades." Zaku lifted his arms to his sides with his palms facing outwards and screamed in defiance, "I won't die here, I won't let a weakling kill me." Compressed streams of air exploded out of the tubes implanted into the teen and hit the rotund Sharingan's hands, stalling the chubby boy's attack. Kuji grit his teeth and tried to ignore the pain, tried to outlast his opponent and win, but with another shout of rage Zaku pumped out more air that caused the giant hands to fly apart. The Akimichi's arms returned to normal size as he cradled his bloody palms to his jacket and moaned in pain. To make matters worse, the wounds on his back began to hurt as the adrenaline pumping through his veins subsided. Zaku didn't care for his opponent's state at that moment though, the only thing he knew that desperate wind blast used up the last of his chakra, so the sound Shinobi dragged himself out of the damaged clearing as fast as possible before the blackness encroaching his vision overtook him. However, the wounded Akimichi couldn't see the boy retreating, he was too busy digging in his pouch for a food pill to fight off unconsciousness. Kuji found one and popped it into his mouth before biting it open. The Sharingan felt a burst of energy flood his body and noticed his opponent was gone but had left a trail of depressed grass with streaks of blood leading into the woods. He tried to push himself upwards to give chase, but his legs gave out and he fell face first into the dirt. Kuji sighed as he got up slower this time, and after looking at the path for several moments he turned away and headed towards the area they designated for the injured quickly as his wounds allowed. Neji eventually caught up to the spider-like boy who eagerly turned to meet his charge head-on. Kitamaru tried to jab the Hyuga's face with his upper left arm, but it was pushed back and he used his lower right arm to block the Konoha Sharingan's follow-up finger thrust. The spider-like shinobi shoved the attacking hand away and tried to uppercut his opponent's chin, however Neji's left palm came up and pushed the arm out wide before disengaging. "The fight is already over, I've closed enough chakra points on your arms to render them useless." Kitamaru had a wicked smirk on his face as pieces of gold webbing fell off the areas Neji hit, and the vulnerable areas were quickly filled in by more of the substance. "I can secrete webbing through my skin that's as tough as steel, your glorified pokes can hurt me." The six-armed teen formed golden daggers in all of his hands and rushed at the Hyuga before attacking from multiple angles. The white-eyed shinobi's face didn't so much as twitch while arms moved in a blur and parried all the attacks, then he thrust a palm into Kitamaru's heart, but the boy only smiled before stabbing towards Neji's face as the Hyuga leapt backwards. He began to give up ground to the Otonin, deflecting furious slashes and stabs when needed, until there was a small lapse and he was able to hop backwards to create some separation. Kitamaru tried to close the gap, however Neji threw two shuriken were flying straight for his eyes, forcing him to stop and duck under them. The Hyuga prodigy took advantage and pulled his right arm back before thrusting his palm forward, then doing the same with his left. Pieces of golden web shattered after two compressed balls of air slammed into Kitamaru's torso and sent him skidding across the earth. Neji saw his opportunity and pulled out several kunai with exploding tags wrapped around the handle and rushed towards his opponent, intent on ending the fight. The Hyuga began tossing the exploding knives at the spider-like boy one by one, but the strange ninja used his palms to control himself as he rolled across the ground, increasing his momentum and dodging the blasts. However, they were only meant to be a distraction. Neji managed to herd the Otonin into a tree with the kunai, and was rapidly closing the distance between him and his trapped adversary. There wasn't enough space for Kitamaru to dodge and the Jinan's vicious palm thrust smashed into his heart and lungs, but the irritating web armor had regrown and absorbed the damage. The Hyuga tried to follow up his attacks and hit the area where the golden armor was once again crumbling off his body, but Kitamaru spat webbing out of his mouth, trapping the Konoha-nin in a sticky cocoon. A basic Juken strike rendered the bindings useless, however the spider-like ninja delivered a brutal kick to Neji's side that sent him rolling across the ground. The Hyuga hissed in pain while gracefully propelling himself upright and took a defensive stance as Kitamaru charged with more daggers in hand. Neji watched the dangerous blades carefully, but his focus was on one point in particular. He knocked the first thrust upwards and grabbed the lower wrist that was slashing from his left, then the long-haired teenager threw it aside and jumped back to avoid a horizontal slash from the right. The Konoha-nin saw his target as the strike passed harmlessly in front of him, and hit that one area twice in rapid succession before repeating the process several more times along the arm as it flew by. A golden knife bounced harmlessly off the ground after Kitamaru's middle right arm fell limply onto the one beneath it. The spider-like boy pushed it behind the limb, however it continued to swing awkwardly as he shifted nervously. Neji had a cocky smirk as his opponent growled at him, "How did you do that?" The Hyuga charged the surprised ninja with his index and middle fingers on both hands separated while they glowed blue with concentrated chakra. Kitamaru stabbed with his lower left arm, however Neji sent the blow out wide with his right wrist before staggering his strikes on the Otonin's tenketsu with the two glowing fingers on his left hand, then the Hyuga repeated the process up his opponent's forearm. The spider-like boy felt the stinging hits, unlike before, and fell backwards onto his functioning arms before mule-kicking the Hyuga away. Neji tumbled across the dirt, however he flipped upright and used some kunai to deflect the golden daggers that were thrown at him before following his weapons. He passed between the projectiles after they collided and Kitamaru tried to retreat while creating more, however Neji overloaded his feet with chakra and seemed to explode forward twice as fast. The spider-like teen raised his arms in a futile defense as the Konoha-jinan rained stinging blows onto them. The sound nin threw his arms out wide, the three that worked anyways, and gained enough space to launch a web ball from his mouth. It engulfed the prodigy's face and he leapt backwards while peeling the sticky substance it off with his fingers, while Kitamaru formed daggers with his remaining hands and prepared to launch them towards his blind opponent. However, before they were thrown, a foot impacted the side of his head and sent him careening into the dense forest as the deadly knives dropped to the loam. "Yosh, I have come to the rescue." "Thank you, Lee, but that was unnecessary." The green-clad boy looked confused after the body of his rival with webbing covering his face dissolved into mud, and Neji emerged from the canopy of a nearby tree. "I had a trap set." The boy looked embarrassed and apologized while their third teammate landed next to them and scolded the spandex-clad shinobi, "Damn it, Lee, you were supposed to go to the injured area and prepare to move anybody that needed assistance." Neji nodded when Tenten finished. "She's right, as you can see I have things handled here." The spandex-wearing shinobi nodded sagely. "Ah, I see my eternal rival wishes to test his flames of youth. Very well, I am off." Lee disappeared in a green blur as Hyuga grit his teeth. Tenten ignored the scene and looked towards the woods before Kitamaru emerged. The enemy ninja was seething with rage after getting blindsided by the powerful kick and stared murderously at them. "Well, I'm supposed to provide backup people who need it before playing my part, so I'll let you test your flames of youth and help the others." The bulging veins above Neji's eyebrow twitched visibly as she jumped into the woods. He suppressed his irritation before turning and throwing several shuriken at the sound nin who was forming something elaborate with his webs. The spider-like teen didn't stop spitting up the golden substance as he took cover behind a tree, and Neji cursed when he saw the boy finish creating a bow and 2 arrows. When the Auto Shinobi jumped out from behind the trunk, he fired both shots at once before quickly forming more and notching them on the string. Although he was surprised by their speed, Neji was able to roll underneath the web arrows. However, despite dodging the lethal projectiles, he cursed because there were 2 more golden arrows nearly completed. The Hyuga pushed himself airborne and spun rapidly while expelling chakra from his tenketsu. Then when the Jinan's foot landed on the earth, a blue dome of chakra surrounded him while he said, "Kaiden." The chakra shield easily deflected the arrows, and when the hemisphere disappeared, Neji launched several haki kushu towards his opponent before following them. Kitamura launched a strand of thread at a tree behind him and pulled himself backwards to avoid the blasts while rapidly firing arrows one at a time. Neji zigzagged between them without losing any momentum, and stopped about 10 feet short of his opponent while the Auto Nin jumped and tried to ready another shot. The spider-like boy wasn't even able to form the arrow before he gasped in pain as another vacuum palm impacted his stomach, smashing him into the tree. He dropped the bow and slid down the bark while the Hyuga spread his legs and raised his arms. Kitamura tried to pull himself to his feet, but found he couldn't move as Neji intoned, "Hakirakuchu Ionsho, 8 trigrams 64 palms." He charged the frozen Auto Nin and began the assault, 2 palms. The Hyuga made sure to hit the same point twice, 4 palms, 2 more tenketsu closed, 8 palms, 16 palms, 32 palms, 64 palms. Neji finished his assault with a vicious 2-palm strike to Kitamaru's stomach that launched him into the trunk once more and cracked the wood. The Sound Shinobi coughed up blood as he stared at the Konoha Nin, who approached him with a glowing palm raised. Unfortunately, Neji didn't take one thing into consideration. The Hyuga prodigy brought his palm down to finish the fight, but gasped in surprise when his opponent vomited sticky goop onto him that began hardening immediately before rolling away. As Kitamaru stumbled into the forest, he laughed. Spiders use more than webs to trap their prey. Neji easily cracked through the shell and prepared to start after the Auto Nin. But when he looked up into the sky, a frown split the teen's face while he muttered to nobody in particular, "It seems you've gotten lucky, we'll finish this later." Doten, Dorohoshi. Earth release, mud silhouette. Kankuro silently cursed as he brought Sanshao in front of him and raised the mask. The frills at the side unfolded and parted the mud until Aki finished his second sequence of hand seals, Suten, Mizurappa. The water fed the mud river and Kankuro was forced to leap into the air and use his chakra to stand on the viscous liquid that now covered the battlefield. The puppeteer cursed that he couldn't attack from the shadows, but he wasn't willing to leave Kiba open like that. The Sinanin's musings were cut short when strands of mud tried to wrap around his ankles. He jumped above the swinging tendrils while the mud shot upwards in pillars and sent Karasu and Kurori speeding forward, and 2 puppets separated the tiny ninja with a barrage of poisonous senbone after looping around mud columns created by Taisho. Kankuro pulled Sanshao in front of him to block as Aki called out, "Suten, Mijdepo, water release, water gun." Iron deflected the speeding ball of water before the mask fell backwards and Salamander charged forward, spraying poison gas from its mouth. Taisho went through a series of hand seals as his teammate jumped next to him and a dome of mud protected them from the gas. However, the hemisphere was stuck with dozens of exploding kunai launched by Karasu. Mud flew everywhere as the explosion destroyed the dome and displaced large waves that rolled over the field, but there was no sign of the 2 Jinan. Kankuro's neck twisted frantically as he looked around the battlefield until his opponents emerged behind him with their palms raised in his direction. The puppeteer silently cursed as he heard, "Doden, Dorohoshi, and Suten, Mizurappa," at the same time, before another giant mud wave rushed towards him. The Sunanin jumped skywards and pulled Karasu underneath his feet before using it to vault to the safety of the trees while pulling his arms back. His opponents looked up as dozens of crow's compartments popped open before a plethora of weaponry was launched out of the puppet and spread over the mud field. Poison gas and explosions burst around the clearing while what seemed like thousands of senbone, shuriken, and kunai blocked the fighters' vision of each other. When the attack ended, an unnatural stillness overtook the area until 2 heads came up from the mud and gasped for air. Taisho and Aki looked around the clearing for any signs of their opponent, however there was no trace of Kankuro or his puppets. They knew he wouldn't have retreated that easily, so the tiny nin headed for the cover of the forest until a creepy chattering sound echoed around the clearing, and Kurori burst out of the tree line with spinning blades extended from its arms. The 2 shinobi turned and headed in another direction, however Salamander popped up from the mud and expelled a strange black powder towards the 2 Jinan. They didn't know what it was, and they also didn't want to find out, so the duo turned sharply to the right. However, before they could gain traction on the gelatinous liquid, a shower of sparks emerged from Sanshao's nose and ignited the gunpowder. A massive explosion that dwarfed the others propelled the tiny shinobi away from Kankuro, but they were heading right towards Black Ant with no way to change their course. The puppet's chest opened as it moved in front of Taisho, and the surly Jinan tried flailing his arms to slow down or change direction, but it was futile, and he flew into the opening and sent the puppet speeding backwards with a sickening crack as the trapdoor closed. Aki lifted his head out of the mud and looked on in horror as Karasu separated into 7 pieces and rushed towards Kurori before sliding into conveniently placed slots on Black Ant, causing streams of blood to gush from the holes and stain the mud underneath it red. The remaining tiny nin tried to retreat the other way until he ran headfirst into an iron mask that popped up from the mud. The dazed shinobi tried to regain his bearings and escape to the safety of the forest. However, he saw a flash of orange and green before a shinobi sandal crushed his ribcage, causing the bones to pierce the organs they were protecting. Aki fell lifelessly to the mud and began to sink as Lee gave Kankuro the thumbs up. "Yosh, I have stopped his escape. A little help here, Lee." The spandex-clad boy's ridiculously large eyebrows shot up into his strangely shiny bowl cut. "Ah, sorry Kuuji-san. I saw the enemy trying to get away and reacted on instinct. I did not mean to drop you. To make up for my mistake, I shall do 1,000 push-ups on my pinky finger while baking an apology cake, and if I cannot do that, it's fine, Lee." The chubby teen cut off the eccentric Jinan before he could continue. "Just try to be more careful next time." The spandex-wearing teen emerged from the tree line moments later, dragging the injured Akimichi, and gently laid him near Kiba on a patch of dry earth. "Of course, Kuuji-san. And if I cannot do that, I shall." The taijutsu specialist continued listing his series of self-imposed penalties as the two conscious shinobi groaned in annoyance, wishing they were blissfully unconscious like Kiba. Dosu growled as he backpedaled, trying to create some space between him and the Hyuga princess, but he couldn't get his feet underneath him to counter her determined assault. Every time the sound nin tried to gain some distance and retreat, the kunoichi matched his movements, and to make matters worse, he couldn't risk getting hit by her strikes, so she was able to keep his gauntlet from getting struck and vibrating, which rendered his primary attack useless. The boy frowned underneath his bandages while trying to leap backwards, and once again the Hyuga matched him and lunged forward, but Dosu knew he would have to take a risk to stop Hinata's attack. This time the Jinan exploded forward after landing and blocked her fingers using his gauntlet before loading it with chakra and flicking the steel with a black ring on his right index finger. Hinata retreated when she saw the sound drill forming and was able to avoid it easily. She lost the initiative though and was forced to take a defensive stance while the Auto Jinan charged. The kunoichi ducked under an uppercut in the sound drill that followed before trying to hit his stomach with a palm strike, but she was forced to abandon the attack somersault backwards after seeing the vibrating gauntlet reverse direction and smash into the earth. The Konoha-nin retook a defensive stance while calmly eyeing her opponent. Dosu lifted his bandaged arm while swinging his weapon of choice side to side in a taunting manner. "You can try all you want, little girl, but you'll never get close. I know better than to let a Hyuga touch me." The kunoichi's wide eyes narrowed while she glared at her opponent. I will not fail here. I won't let my friends down." The sound nin chuckled. "That didn't sound very confident. Are you telling me or trying to convince yourself? Because saying it won't make it true, you weak bitch." The boy sprinted towards her after finishing his sentence, and Hinata started expelling chakra from various tenketsu. "You're right, Kaiden." The girl started spinning rapidly and a blue sphere formed that deflected the sound drill and its creator. Dosu recovered in midair and gracefully flipped before landing on his feet. He waited for the dome to vanish and charged as the chakra began to fade, revealing the spinning Hyuga, but when the Jinan was within 10 feet of the girl, he stopped and hit his gauntlet with the rings on all 5 fingers. Hinata frowned when her trap failed and quick-stepped backwards when the Auto-nin slapped his weapon, but she wasn't prepared for 5 drills forming and spreading out in an attempt to surround her. The kunoichi saw the escape avenues closing rapidly, but the tag she planted before the Kaiden disappeared exploded, and the Byakugan allowed her to watch the concussive force disrupt the sound waves, scattering them harmlessly. The Hyuga princess's milky white eyes widened slightly after seeing that, but the girl knew there was no way to take advantage of it now, so she vowed to tell somebody after the test. Hinata pushed it out of her mind because Dosu was already rushing towards her. His left arm came in a wide hook and she ducked under the accompanying sound wave before rolling away from the gauntlet as her opponent's swing reversed directions. She gracefully regained her feet and back-flipped away from the bandaged teen before facing him in an offensive stance. "It's time to end this." The sound Jinan laughed mockingly at her proclamation. "That's funny, princess, because you can't even get close." She ignored the taunt and burst into motion, rushing towards the enemy shinobi. The Hyuga watched as Dosu moved to flick the left side of his gauntlet, and as his thumb hit the metal she turned right and watched the wave go to her left. The boy growled as Hinata readjusted her course, and went to flick the back of the gauntlet above his wrist. The kunoichi jumped as he hit the weapon with his ring and cleared the sound drill that formed before launching a haki kushu. Dosu jumped straight up as the ground behind him was crushed, and the Hyuga princess exploded into motion after her feet hit the dirt. She seemed to close the distance between her and the airborne shinobi in the blink of an eye while saying, "Haki Sanjuni Sho." Hinata zeroed in on the arm containing the gauntlet, intent on disabling the dangerous weapon first. 2 palms, 4 palms, 8 palms, then the Hyuga transitioned to his torso, 16 palms, 32 palms. The girl jumped back after closing Dosu's chakra points and the boy grabbed his dangling left arm. "Damn it, I guess I'm outclassed here. Good thing I know when to retreat and call reinforcements." The boy's right arm snaked into his pouch and pulled out a tuning fork. Hinata realized he channeled chakra into the gauntlet when he grabbed it, and now he was loading the fork too. Dosu slammed them together and flipped back into the trees as a series of massive sound waves emerged from the instruments, shaking the surrounding forest and causing the earth to rumble. The Auto Nin dropped his tuning fork, which continued to emit the powerful waves, and hastily jumped through the canopy, preparing to rally the allied shinobi from minor villages. When the trees stopped swaying back and forth in the clearing, a patch of dirt began to move before blue hair and white eyes popped out. Hinata pulled the rest of her body out of the earth and breathed a sigh of relief. The kunoichi was glad all Suna shinobi were required to learn Doten, Moguregakur no Jutsu, hiding like a mole technique, for desert ambushes. Her relief was short-lived after realizing how long it took to complete her assigned task, and she started berating herself while rushing back towards the others. The Byakugan allowed her to see Dosu's attacks, which is why Shikamaru made the shinobi her opponent, but the Dujutsu didn't have the predictive or analytical abilities of the Sharingan, so Hinata had to figure out the pattern herself so she could safely attack him. "I hope nobody got hurt because of me." After Daiki's eyes finished healing, he growled at the 2 kunoichi in front of him. The enraged shinobi suppressed the urge to charge in there and smash them to pieces, knowing he couldn't afford to waste energy this time. The forbidden technique wasn't supposed to be used more than once a week if possible, but he had been binging and resting while anticipating this moment. The Toninin also knew better than to underestimate his opponents. Nobody had ever hurt the Jinan after he transformed as badly as the pink-haired girl, not even the Jounin of his village. Still, their bickering was annoying him. The enlarged teen ripped a chunk of wood from the tree next to him and threw it at the arguing kunoichi. They jumped in opposite directions, and Daiki rushed towards Sakura as she launched a barrage of senbon and poison bombs. The boy grit his teeth through the pain caused by the acidic poison while his steely muscles kept the lethal needles from penetrating his taut skin. Sakura cursed when her attack failed and the juggernaut didn't slow at all. The kunoichi knew she wasn't fast enough to avoid the attack with his extended reach and enhanced speed. Not seeing any other option, the medic clenched her right hand into a tight fist before running towards Daiki. Ino desperately called out for her friend as she moved to intercept the muscular shinobi's punch with her own, but the blonde gasped in surprise after hearing a large crack and watched in shock as the tiny nin's muscular arm crumpled and streams of blood burst from the shattered limb. Daiki hissed in pain as the bones and joints from his fingers to his shoulder were crushed, and he wailed after the girl shattered his cheekbone with a vicious left hook. He felt the healing kick in and soothe the pain somewhat, but the throbbing ache as his bones knit themselves back together distracted him, allowing a hot blade sliced into his left side. The cut was mostly superficial, at least to the juggernaut it was, but the pain from the cauterized wound was enormous and took more energy to heal because of the scarring and extra tissue damage from the intense heat. Ino jumped back and began cracking her flaming whip, but the raging behemoth shook off the stinging bites as he wildly swung his monstrous arms. Sakura ducked under the muscular appendages and jabbed Daiki's abs, causing the massive boy to tumble across the clearing until a tree stopped him with a loud crack. He growled in frustration as he brought his fist down and splintered the earth beneath it. The tawny nin pushed himself upright as his wounds finished healing and angrily stared at the Konoha nin in front of him. The boy wanted to yell and scream in frustration, but he was wary of getting another poison bomb thrown into his mouth. Daiki looked at his opponents, but something seemed strange. They were standing completely still and didn't look to be winded at all. The shinobi realized it was a genjutsu as the girls in front of him disappeared and a burning pain erupted from both sides of his abdomen. Daiki saw a flash of yellow and purple blur away from him before a black-gloved fist flattened the front of the hulking boy's face and sent his head into the tree. Sakura retreated and growled in frustration when their opponent started blindly swinging his arms and kicking his legs. He could seemingly take as many hits as she could land, but one good blow would probably end it for her. Simple projectiles didn't work and Ino's whip was all but useless because it could only injure his eyes. The pink-haired kunoichi watched with disgust as Daiki's face reformed before he sneered, however the Jonan eyed them warily from a distance. Ino began making motions with her descent while Sakura watched from the corner of her eye. The blonde kept tapping the folded one against the sharp edge of her open one, picking up speed each time, before the pinkette gave a small nod. Daiki was tired of waiting for the Konoha Jonan to move, he was only giving them more time to plan while his energy source burned itself out. The juggernaut bent over and ripped a huge boulder out of the earth, and with a grunt of exertion he split the rock in half before throwing the two pieces at the kunoichi. The blonde one retreated out of the clearing as the pinkette ran towards him and vaulted the rock. Daiki pivoted to face the girl and kicked the end of the hole he created when ripping up the boulder, which set a wave of debris flying at her. Sakura ignored the stinging wounds and shallow cuts as she sprinted through the shower of rocks, letting the smaller pieces bounce off of her and crush the ones that could cause serious injury. When the kunoichi got closer to Daiki he raised his right arm over his head and prepared to crush the charging girl, but when he brought his fist down Sakura loaded her feet with chakra and jumped onto the tree trunk on Daiki's right as his fist blocked his view of her. She stuck to the bark for a moment before blasting towards the transformed shinobi, and as the tiny nin's fist smashed the earth Sakura punched him in the kidney. Seeing her chance Ino started running at the flying Jonan while channeling fire nature chakra into her Tesen. The blades flared an angry red as she brought it forward and tried to use Daiki's inertia to inflict a crippling wound to his stomach, however the force was too much for the kunoichi to hold on and her fan was ripped from her grasp after sinking several inches into the boy's abdomen. Both of the girls knew it wasn't enough to kill him and ran towards the down juggernaut while he pushed himself up, trying to inflict the killing blow before he healed. Ino's Tesen flared a fiery red while Sakura's fist glowed blue. But when they got near Daiki he growled furiously and smashed his massive fists into the earth. Large chunks of rock exploded in every direction, some of which smashed into the charging kunoichi, knocking them away. Daiki shakily regained his feet to see the girls were disoriented and trying to support each other while retreating. He let out a victorious roar and prepared to charge the vulnerable kunoichi when several dozen paper balls rained down onto his head. The muscular Jonan looked closer to see the balls were about 10 explosive tags wrapped around each other, and his yell turned desperate for a moment before getting silenced by a massive explosion that sent smoke high above the forest. An area with a radius of 30 feet was completely annihilated by the blast and the damage spread even farther. The only sign of Daiki's existence was several dismembered body parts and pieces of his muscular torso that were spread across the devastated area. Tenten sighed after the dust settled and pouted, "That was almost all my exploding tags. How can you still have more?" She looked at the two younger kunoichi as Ino finished speaking and sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. "I like explosions." Sakan regained his balance after rolling across the ground and scrambled behind a tree while another wind blast ripped through the area, stirring up debris. The Ado Nin peeked out from behind the trunk after the winds passed to search for Tamari, but another Kamaitachi came from his right this time and sent him tumbling again. He flipped to his feet and launched a barrage of exploding kunai towards the area of the last rush of wind, but they were deflected by another gust and blew up harmlessly in midair. The shinobi retreated after his attack failed and darted up a tree before traveling in the canopy in an attempt to flank the girl, but a kunai with a strange tag hit the wood next to his head and he was blinded by a bright flash, which caused the effeminate boy to lose his footing. Sakan fell out of the tree and felt a blast of air hit his back while falling, adding to his momentum, before he smashed into the ground with a gasp of pain. The sound nin ignored the burning in his ribs and retreated deeper into a thicker part of the woods before Tamari's next attack was launched. He growled from his hiding spot behind the tree and tried to think of a way to get close to the girl when several shuriken curved around the trunk with wire trailing behind them. The effeminate shinobi strained against the tightly bound steel cord as a voice on the other side of the tree said, "I may be from Sunagakoer, but I've been in training in Konoha long enough to pick up a few tricks for fighting in the woods." Sakan grit his teeth and forced down his anger while the bitch from Suna taunted him. He took a deep breath and grinned after realizing Tamari did the work and closed the distance for him. An arm emerged from his torso and grabbed a kunai out of his pouch before slicing through the metal strings. The wind mistress' steel eyes widened in surprise when she felt the wires go slack and her opponent rushed around the large tree, but the blonde kunoichi was still able to jump backwards while swinging her battle fan. The attack pushed Sakan against the trunk he was just tied up to and propelled her back into the safety of the treetops. The Ado Nin once again suppressed his frustration knowing he'd get his turn. The boy sharpened his senses while waiting for a disturbance with his back against the bark, and after several seconds he was able to sense the next attack flying towards him and use the Kawarimi no Jutsu. Tamari narrowed her eyes when the Kamaitachi hit a log and used it to substitute as she saw Sakon leap at her from a nearby branch. When the Kunoichi reappeared, she swung her fan while calling out, "Dai Kamaitachi." A sharp wail echoed through the woods as the cutting wind slashed through the branch easily, but it also went through the sound Shinobi like he wasn't there before he disappeared in a puff of smoke while the limb fell to the ground. Tamari looked around frantically before hearing some rustling above her, which caused the girl to look up and see Sakon dropping from the canopy of the tree. She jumped backwards as his heel sliced through the air and tried to keep him at a distance, but her opponent exploded forward as he hit the ground and didn't allow her any room. The iron of Tamari's fan blocked the effeminate shinobi's jab, but two fists emerged from his forearm and punched the blonde in her kidneys before yanking the fan from her weakened grasp and tossing it aside. She grunted in pain while her battle fan was ripped away and pulled out her two smaller ones. Blades emerged at either side of the fans and she began channeling elemental chakra through them. Sakon spun around the slashing knives and tried to hit the Kunoichi's eye with a right hook when he completed the turn. The Wind Mistress winced after blocking the attack with her left forearm and ignored the pain while quickly pushing the appendage away before more arms emerged. Then the blonde swung her right fan in an attempt to decapitate her opponent. Sakon leaned back and avoided the steel of Tamari's dangerous blade, but his eyes widened in surprise as the attack cut the tip of his bang off and a line of blood formed on his cheek. The Auto Shinobi growled and jumped left as the Kunoichi launched a vertical crescent of wind at him. Then, after the dangerous wind blades passed by, he retaliated with a barrage of kunai. The Kunoichi gracefully danced between the lethal projectiles and sent an X of wind blades towards her opponent after avoiding them, but Sakon predicted the attack and quickly pushed himself to the left before exploding towards the surprised blonde and shoulder-checking her. Tamari painfully rolled across the forest floor and flipped to her feet when she finally slowed down, but her opponent was rapidly closing in. The shinobi blocked the girl's left arm as she swung the deadly fan before he pivoted on his left foot and kicked her stomach. Two arms burst out of his ankle, and the right one grabbed her before she flew away as the left smashed her chin with a vicious uppercut, sending her airborne. The Kunoichi dropped her fans and hung in midair for a moment while Sakon jumped and delivered a brutal spinning kick to the girl's midsection, which sent her tumbling across the grass once more. The dazed Janan could make out the battle fan through the haze clouding her vision, but before she could reach out for it, the white-haired ninja picked her up with his right hand. Two fists emerged from his arm and began pummeling the defenseless girl mercilessly for several seconds, and when he got bored, Sakon threw her across the clearing. However, the woozy Kunoichi managed to somehow land on her feet before she rolled to the left to avoid several lazily thrown shuriken. Tamari's efforts amounted to nothing though. The Auto Nin blurred behind her and hit the base of her spine with a brutal front kick. The Sina Kunoichi groaned after skidding across the ground, and when she lifted her head she saw Sakon approaching. However, she also saw her fan was right there too. Tamari watched her tormentor grin when she desperately reached for the weapon before he seemed to disappear. Suddenly the blonde found on the other side of the clearing with a new bruise, and though her sharp mind was fuzzy, she recognized her opponent kept launching her near her fan intentionally for his own amusement. The beginnings of a plan formed in the girl's head as she sensed the sound ninja's approach. She shakily pushed herself up before taking a defensive posture as he neared. Sakon just smirked at her wobbly stance before he charged and cocked his fist back. Tamari lunged under the jab and desperately tried to tackle him to the ground, but the shinobi pivoted 180 degrees around her futile attack before hitting her stomach with a brutal roundhouse kick. Despite the throbbing pain that racked her body, the blonde smirked from her position on the ground. She lunged at the correct angle and his counterattack sent her near the large battle fan, not to mention she managed to move with the attack to lessen the potential damage. Tamari snuck her right hand into her left sleeve and gripped the handle of a hidden kunai sheath to holster sewn into the sleeve. She slowly pulled the blade out and curled around it while Sakon approached. The Auto Shinobi stood above her and sneered when she futilely tried to reach for her battle fan from the fetal position, but to his surprise the blonde grinned in response and swung a kunai coated in wind chakra at his ankle after he lifted his right foot up to viciously stomp her. Sakon was forced to backflip above the attack and Tamari launched towards her favored weapon with a burst of chakra. He rushed towards the Kunoichi, hoping to get close before the annoying fan came back into play, but she had already run her right thumb over a cut and swiped the blood on the design in the middle of the canvas. The Wind Mistress swung the massive weapon while yelling, "Kushios, Kiri Kiri Mai," summoning, "Quick beheading dance." It seemed like a typhoon broke out in the surrounding forest, and Sakon was stopped in his tracks by the intense winds. The shinobi was forced to raise his arms to protect his face when small cuts began to cover his body and he desperately looked for anywhere to hide. However, deep slashes were being made on every side of every tree around him. Sakon briefly wondered why he was receiving less damage than the trees before he screamed in pain, and seconds later the top half of his torso slid off the bottom as the legs limply collapsed to the ground. The winds abruptly stopped, revealing a one-eyed white weasel that was perched on the end of a giant sickle near his wounded mistress as she leaned on her battle fan. The loyal summon had picked up her smaller fans during his attack and was staring at the girl with his one eye, reminding her of a certain blonde teammate, before saying, "What kind of place is this? I've never met a tree that I couldn't cut down." Tamari looked around the clearing and realized all the massive trees in the forest around her were heavily scarred, but none were felled in the assault. "Well, maybe you should train harder." Kamatari began grumbling while he hoisted the sickle onto his back and began floating on a pocket of dense air he created. "Save your life and this is the thanks I get. Maybe next time I won't come." The kunoichi sighed and began rubbing the weasel behind his ears, causing him to purr. "Yes, weasels purr, look it up." The Ermine pushed his head up into her hands and opened his mouth expectantly as Tamari pulled out a piece of jerky from her pouch and threw it up. "Here you go, Kamatari, it's teriyaki. My favorite," was his muffled reply as he gnawed on the dried meat. "Maybe I'll come around next time too." The weasel and his oversized sickle disappeared in a puff of smoke as the blonde finished regaining her bearings. The kunoichi suppressed a wince as she slung her fan around her back and started towards the meeting spot, only stopping to spit on the top half of Sakon's unmoving body. Nearly a minute after she left, the Otonin's eyes shot open and he cried out, "Shit, that hurt, get out here you asshole." A full copy of Sakon emerged from his torso, except his left eye was covered by the white bang, and it wasn't sliced at the tip. "Well, you got your ass kicked nicely." The torso growled up at his near copy, "Shut up, Hakan, if I could have used the seal she wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds. Kind of pathetic that you'd have to use the seal against a Jinan." Sakon stared up at his twin while the boy grinned tauntingly, "Put a sock in it and help me up here." The annoying smile never left Hakan's face as he bent over and absorbed the torso before doing the same to the legs, and when a head popped out his neck it said, "I need some sleep. This could take a few days, maybe a week or so." Hakan nodded and headed back towards camp. "Okay, I'll take over for now, bro." Jirobo snarled as he charged his pale opponent. However, Sai easily avoided the lumbering shinobi by flipping over him while pulling a brace of shuriken out of his pouch. He threw them at the fleshy boy's back, and the projectiles embedded themselves in his fat as Jirobo hissed in pain. He turned around angrily while forming hand seals and slammed both palms onto the ground after finishing, calling out, "Doden, Doryuso." Several lines of 4-foot-tall earth spears appeared in front of the hefty ninja before sinking back into the ground. After those disappeared, more rows appeared in front of them and the process continued as the spikes sped towards the artistic shinobi. Sai stared at the wave of earth spears unconcerned and jumped onto a nearby tree while unrolling a scroll. "Disappointing, and here I was expecting better from you." A flock of crows emerged from the scroll and began swarming around Jirobo. Meaty arms swung wildly as the shinobi tried to dispel the birds that were blocking his vision, and though he got several kunai and shuriken flew through the flock and pierced his skin. The meaty ninja screamed in rage while forming several seals. The Otonin slammed his left foot into the ground like a sumo wrestle and slabs of rock burst out of the ground and formed a protective tent around their creator. Sai pushed himself off the tree as the dirt underneath him burst upwards and his opponent flew out of the earth. Jirobo growled after he emerged and missed Sai, but he used a tree branch to swing towards the knee operative, attacking him with a fury of taijutsu. The Konohanin danced just out of the pudgy teen's range for several seconds before he sidestepped a jab and speedily unsheathed his tanto. The pale artist spun a deadly blade upwards and it left a deep gash in Jirobo's arm as he retracted it. Then the pale artist ducked under a left hook and lifted his short blade higher, causing the sharp edge to slice deeply into the fleshy shinobi's forearm. The Otonin tried to body slam Sai after his failed attack, but the teen just backpedaled and watched the chubby boy fall onto his ample stomach. Instead of taking advantage of his opponent's position, Sai just taunted the boy with distaste, lacing his tone, "I see why you're so fat. The blubber provides a protective layer to compensate for your incompetence." Jirobo furiously turned to face his opponent and gathered his strength before charging the boy in a fit of rage, but he didn't realize it was much slower than his earlier assaults. Sai effortlessly sidestepped the attacking boy at the last second and slashed deep into his side with the tipless tanto. The fleshy teen fell to the ground with a gasp of pain while clasping the vicious wound with his pudgy hands. It wasn't fatal, but it made him unable to fight effectively. The Otonin could only hold the two flaps of skin together as the artist continued in a condescending tone, "You'll find that you are far outclassed here. Like you, I am no ordinary Jinan, Jirobo of the South Gate." Orochimaru's former bodyguard looked up at his opponent with surprise covering his blubbery face. "Did you really think we wouldn't know who you were? I know you three had a reunion with your former teammate recently. Are you really dense enough to believe we would let Tuya walk around freely if she held anything back? Sai raised his bloody tanto and stepped towards his downed opponent for the kill, even though the logical part of his brain kept telling him access to Jirobo's knowledge would benefit Konoha. He didn't care about that right now. His body was moving on its own, the pale artist just wanted to murder the shinobi in front of him, and if he suffered all the better. Sai raised the tanto in a daze as he stood over his oblivious enemy, however before he could finish him a lightning bolt streaked across the sky and broke him out of the trance. The Neonbu shook his head to clear it quickly before unrolling a scroll. He pumped it with chakra and watched as hundreds of small hawks emerged before flying over the forest. He looked back at the prone body briefly before paying it no mind and heading back towards the designated area. Karen smirked for a moment after the explosion before she frowned and jumped backwards as several shuriken pierced the dirt in front of her. The redhead growled while staring up at a tree near the explosion to see a singed Shikamaru, who's still somewhat wet and staring at her with narrowed eyes, and that was supposed to kill you too. You only have yourself to blame. Gone was the boy's lazy tone, now his voice sounded cold and dangerous. The water protected me from the initial heat so I was able to kawarimi with a piece of debris created by the explosion. The redhead went through a quick series of seals, then I'll kill you by hand, Mizu no Tatsumaki. Shikamaru jumped off the branch as a whirlpool of water burst up from the ground and destroyed the limb, along with several others above it. Karen blurred through another set of hand seals and pointed her palm at the airborne boy as he yanked a kunai from his back pouch. Suten, Ha and Ryu. Shikamaru heaved the kunai at a nearby tree and yanked himself towards it by using a wire attached to the knife's handle. The blade was yanked out of the bark after the initial pull, but the Genon had enough momentum to escape the attack. He slid across the ground on his back before flipping up and grumbling about the fact she was almost on top of him. Karen pulled out a kunai of her own and lunged forward when she got close, trying to stab him. Shikamaru's left hand grabbed her wrist and pulled her back as he sidestepped while his right delivered a jab to her cheek with his other hand. The redhead ignored the throbbing and twisted mid-air while throwing the kunai. Shikamaru jumped backwards and formed the rat seal, causing his shadow to shoot towards the kunoichi. She did a backward somersault before performing a back handspring, and when her feet hit the ground and darted to the left with clenched fists. Karen managed to outpace the black tendrils chasing her and ran towards the Konoha Genon, however when she got close to its master the shadow underneath the Nara snaked out in an attempt to catch her. The only way she could dodge was by jumping in the path of a different tendril, so the redhead propelled herself forward and threw the dirt she had collected while sliding across the ground. The soil hit the surprised shinobi's eyes and he reflexively brought his hands up to wipe them clean, canceling the jutsu as the kunoichi tackled him. They tumbled across the ground in a heap, and when they came to a stop Karen managed to get on top of Shikamaru and pin his arms to his side with her legs. She pulled out a kunai and raised it over her head, but before she could bring it down a feminine voice called out, "Haki Kushu." A blast of compressed air smashed into the redhead and sent her into the woods as the kunai clattered helplessly to the ground near Shikamaru's head. Hinata ran towards the down Nara while pulling her canteen out of her backpack. When she and the Hyuga princess helped the lazy boy up while pouring water onto his eyelids to wash them out. Shikamaru wiped his eyes with a sleeve. "Thanks Hinata, I thought it was game over for a second there. I had no idea she picked up that dirt. The Auto Kunoichi is falling back, and my opponent has retreated to get reinforcements," replied the Hyuga. The Nara pulled out a scroll, unsealed a hollow shoot of bamboo with a cork bearing a seal on top. "Thankfully this is waterproof." Shikamaru uncapped the tube and it shot a flash of lightning into the sky that was accompanied by a loud crack. The two Konohanin looked up as a countless swarm of black birds flew into the air before flying circles above one area. The reason became clear when Tenten jumped up onto an exposed branch and unrolled a scroll. After swiping her bloody thumb down at hundreds of wooden kunai flew upwards with tags trailing behind them. The ink birds managed to catch most of them and the knot came undone so the practice kunai fell to the earth. The ones that hit with the tag exploded into firebombs that scorched the surrounding areas. Hinata and Shikamaru were already jumping back towards where they first made contact and found they were the last to arrive. The Nara cursed when he saw a wounded Kuuji being carried by Lee, and as his mind shifted through all the possibilities for a new formation he realized Kiba was tucked inside Sanchuo. Sai and Sakura will run ahead of Lee and Kankuro, who will bear the wounded. Tenten and Tamari will be in the back while the rest of us travel in between them and watch their flanks. Everyone nodded hurriedly and formed up as Neji called out, "They're getting close, the lead ones just came into the range of my Byakugan." Nothing else needed to be said and they all began the mad dash to the tower. It didn't take long for the 12 of them to break through the tree line, and after they were clear the ink birds began suicide diving the forest, causing wails of pain to ring out. Lee burst ahead of everybody to kick open the door, and they all rushed in and slammed the door behind them, silencing the shrieks. In the center of the lone camp that survived the firestorm stood 6 sound nin, trying to take stock of the remaining Jinan. The attack killed 9 instantly and another 3 didn't look like they had much time left either. However, the worst thing it did was seriously injure a majority of the contestants. It was hard to tell who was fit to continue. Karen stood on top of a large tree stump and raised her voice, "Okay, everyone, line up with your teams. We need to find out how many are advancing." It took a while for the demoralized ninja to get into formation, but several minutes later they were all lined up and able to assess the damage. Of the 45 they had less than an hour ago, only 33 were standing. There were 6 full teams besides those from Otogakure, 4 teams of 2, and 1 lone shinobi. However, of those 6 teams 4 had members that were seriously injured. 1 shinobi lost his arm, a kunoichi on the other team wasn't able to stand, another kunoichi had 3rd-degree burns covering her body which didn't allow her to move, and 1 Jinan lost his right leg. The Ado nin shook their heads in disgust and started to walk away. Kitamaru remained behind momentarily to say, "Just get your things and get to the tower." The spider-like boy looked like he wanted to add more, but instead he just spit off to the side and followed the others. The Hokage was impressed as he stared down at the 8 teams, 2 from Konoha, 2 of mixed villages, 2 from Otogakure, 1 from Kusagakure, and 1 representing Ame from a balcony overlooking a large floor. He couldn't remember the last time there were this many. Sarutobi easily stood up from his chair and strode to the railing before clearing his throat. "I congratulate all of you for making it past the 2nd stage and will explain the 3rd momentarily, but before that I would like to take a moment and reveal the true purpose of the exam. Most people believe it exists to promote Jinan to Chunin, yet the exam is intended to serve as a substitute for war. Contestants from each nation compete and put their lives on the line to prove the strength of their village. Why do we have to risk our lives for such a stupid reason?" exploded a bandaged Kiba. The old Kage looked down at the Jinan in surprise. Kiba had already competed in the 3rd stage and knew this already, but the Inuzuka's words were laced with venom and rage. "I can assure you the reason is anything but stupid. The 3rd stage is a public tournament that is watched by countless people, from farmers to daimyo, and how you perform reflects upon your village. Doing well will cause its reputation to grow and more people will seek its services, yet failure only leads to the opposite. This is how the balance of power is maintained throughout the nations." The aged leader finished giving his speech and sat down before a sickly Jounin and stepped forward. "May I commence with the 3rd exam, Hokage-sama?" The Sundaime's eyes roved over the participants for several seconds and saw an opportunity. "Sorry Hayate, but I don't know if a preliminary is the best option here. Having 24 Jinan make it to the 3rd round is unprecedented." The old man paused for Anko's huff before continuing, "and as such it needs something equally unique. There can only be 9 contestants in the final round, and if we were to do a preliminary now it would consist of 16 battles. No, I think a change is in order. There are 9 slots available and 8 teams gathered here, so we shall have a tournament consisting of team battles. Obviously changes to the format have to be made, and they shall do so in the month between now and the finals. You shall find out what they are on that day." The examinees began muttering complaints amongst themselves before the Sandaime harshly cut them off. "Enough. As shinobi you must realize the future is never guaranteed in this line of work, so finding out more information the day of the finals is appropriate. I shall see you all in a month." Dismissed. The main doors opened and the Hokage watched the young ninja exit before leaving through a door on the balcony. When it closed, a proctor wearing the standard shinobi uniform with neck-length black hair and gray eyes rushed up to him before hastily bowing several times. "I'm sorry Hokage-sama, but I have something you should hear immediately." The wizened leader recognized the man as one of the people responsible for documenting the participants' successes or failure and felt his stomach sink. "Go on then." The man coughed nervously into his hand before beginning. "Well, the rescue teams that have been scouring the forest have bad news. Besides the 24 in the tower, we have only found 56 other survivors. There were 21 Jinan from the minor villages were near the tower, and 35 from Konoha and Suna that were hiding near the fringes of the training grounds. Some of the things getting reported. Quite frankly sir, it was a massacre in there." The Hokage's eyes hardened as he heard the news and took the folder from the Chunin. "Thank you Juru. Tell the Jounin sensei of the teams who passed to get a report from their students and keep me abreast of the situation. We will interview the other survivors at a later date if necessary." The man recognized the dismissal and hurried off while his leader swiftly scaled the floors of the tower before standing on the roof. Sarutobi gathered chakra from his ample reserves and molded it while forming the sign of the ram. The man disappeared in a cloud of smoke before reappearing outside of his office. He effortlessly walked into the building, though most of his shinobi wouldn't be able to shine to the edge of training ground 44 without passing out, let alone to the middle of the village. He was the Hokage for a reason though. The Sun Daime raised his left fist and two Anbu materialized behind him. Ferret, go retrieve Danzo and tell him to come to my office immediately. Weasel, send a message to the Kaze Kage to inform him of the early casualty report and tell him to expect an update on the situation soon. The two operatives disappeared as silently as they arrived, and Sarutobi entered his office before a small smile flashed across his face. There on the desk was a steeping cup of tea. His secretary was one of the best censors in Anbu and probably realized he was coming long before he performed the sunshine. Fortunately, she knew that fresh tea calmed him down and allowed his more rational thoughts to take hold. The old Kage sat in his chair and sipped from the warm mug before sighing briefly. His anger was slowly ebbing away, but it was being replaced by guilt and regret, things that plagued him often since retaking the hat. He knew what had happened seconds after the report and wished he didn't push Tuya's panic aside, but the thing the old man regretted most was letting his former student live. How many lives would be better today? How many innocent lives had he condemned that day by showing mercy? Now he may not even be able to finish the job if the opportunity arose. Those thoughts didn't plague the old man long, because the oak doors swung open and his rival walked in before sitting across the desk. What is so urgent that it required me to report immediately? Sarutobi slid the manila envelope he took from the proctor across the desk before Danzo picked it up. His lone black eyes surveyed the documents inside for several moments before handing them back to the Hokage. I see, what do you need me to do, Hiruzen? Send a message, replied the Sandaime. You can use Daki no Kuni as a base to deploy your troops into grass country on the land of rice fields while sneaking into Kawa no Kuni using our border with them. Under no circumstances are you to enter Ame no Kuni, that land is too unstable and a large unknown. Make them pay Danzo, terrorize the countryside, blow up dams, destroy roads, burn farms, anything that tells them we are not to be trifled with. Remind them why we are recognized as a major power. I also want you to leave small traces that it was Konoha right before ending the operation. Obviously nothing substantial can be found though. The Warhawk nodded and rose from his seat before heading towards the door. Consider it done. When the oak door is shut, the Hokage pulled out a blank piece of paper with his seal on it before writing a message. After proofreading it several times and rewriting the letter, he rolled it up and sealed it with a drip of wax before stamping it. Then the Sandaime held it up as a panther-masked Anbu appeared in a puff of smoke on one knee. Sarutobi handed it over to the operative while saying, "Take that to the Hawk Tower and send it to the daimyo, please." Panther took the scroll without a word before disappearing as the Hokage sipped his tea while trying to relax. Danzo would be able to handle the minor villages with little effort. Sarutobi just hoped his letter would convince the daimyo to push hard at the upcoming trade negotiations between the allied countries. It was time to remind everyone who the predominant power on the continent was. Kakashi let out a sigh as he walked away from Asuma, Kurenai, and Guy after they finished reporting their student's ordeal to the Hokage. The silver-haired Jounin had a day to digest the tale, but it still left him stunned. He was immensely proud of his Jounin for making it through, yet raw anger had been churning in his gut since hearing the gruesome report. Most of it was towards himself though. There was nothing the legendary shinobi could do to retaliate against someone like Orochimaru, just another reason to pick up my training, I guess. The lazy Jounin was shaken out of his thoughts when he turned onto an empty side street and Rin landed next to him. People might think it's strange that you stopped reading Icha Paradise while walking around town. Kakashi smiled at his girlfriend from behind the mask. Are you telling me to whip it out here? The brunette blushed at his innuendo before huffing. No, because people would think it was weird that you were walking with me while reading it. Kakashi's smile dropped before he started down the street as the medic sighed and followed him. I don't see why revealing our relationship is such a big deal to you, Rin. The man received a light punch to his bicep. Because. The silver-haired Jounin resisted the urge to massage the bridge of his nose in frustration, something he hadn't done since the early days of Team 7. The two had talked about telling their friends multiple times, but Rin wouldn't bend in the slightest. The medic recognized the signs of Kakashi's annoyance and stopped to suppress the voice in her head telling her it wasn't going to work out. It took a few seconds before the whispering stopped, but Kakashi didn't. Why didn't you wait for me? I didn't want people to think something was going on, was the sarcastic reply. Rin winced at the comment and felt the despair that constantly gripped her bubbling under the surface. She really didn't want to push Kakashi away after their reconciliation, so tried to shove the issue aside. Fine, do you want to come to my apartment for lunch? The man looked up at the sign for a brief moment before responding, "Unfortunately I had to meet my students 2 hours ago, and I don't think I can make them wait another 2. The Jounin sensei received another punch to his arm. "Well, come by after, I took the afternoon off." Kakashi feigned shock as the attractive Kunoichi started walking away. "Wait, you're taking a day off? Somebody is definitely going to realize something is up. You should definitely go back to work." The legendary Shinobi disappeared in a swirl of leaves after finishing his sentence, just before a rock flew through them. Rin let out a sigh as Kakashi disappeared and realized he never answered her. Sai was sitting in the shade under a tree and looked up from the sketchbook he was drawing in. Tamari was aggressively polishing her fan for the 28th time while a dark aura surrounded Sakura as she was lying down with her head resting on a medical book. The pale shinobi just shook his head at the girl's annoyance. They knew Kakashi was perpetually late, so why not bring something to do instead of daydreaming about physically hurting the man? As Sai looked back down at his book, he felt a familiar chakra collecting in the area around him and nearly let out a sigh. It was like their teacher wanted to see how long he had to make the two Kunoichi wait before they attacked him for it. The lanky man appeared in front of them with a puff of smoke, holding his customary book open and giving the Genin an eye smile. "Sorry I'm late, but a horde of oddmakers tried to corner me and get information about you guys. I had to lose them before coming here and they were persistent. It was worth the effort though because my students would have been in danger if I didn't." The customary responsive liar didn't faze the Jounin and he continued like nothing happened. "Now let's get down to business. You three already have exceptional teamwork, so you all need to learn some new tricks because every other team saw most of them in the forest already. I've talked with your other teachers and we've worked out a schedule. The first 3 weeks will consist of individual training like before the last exams. After that we'll do some team exercises so you can familiarize yourselves with everybody's new moves and do some light activities the last 3 days to stay loose. If you guys need me for anything I'm always available. If you can find me. Now then, I have things to do." So the silver-haired shinobi disappeared in a swirl of leaves and the three Genin looked at each other while the Kunoichi sweat dropped. After a few moments of silence, Sakura let out a groan. "He's probably just going to be banging Rin-sensei." Tamari stared at the pink head in surprise. "They're dating?" The younger girl just shrugged. "I think they're trying to hide it, but she's not as hostile towards him when I see them together, and she's been acting like a teenage girl." The sandy blonde had a taunting grin on her face when Sakura finished. "So basically she's acting like you." A vein throbbed over the medic's green eye while she grit her teeth. "At least people don't mistake me for a man." "What? Who said that?" "All sorts of people, you cow." Electricity sparked between the girl's eyes as Tamari pushed her breasts upwards. "That's weird. People say that since I have these and you're flatter than most preteen boys. I'm surprised people don't think you're a cross-dresser." Sai just shook his head and prepared to shine away as Sakura launched herself towards the blonde. He didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. Again. Soft pink lips curled upwards into a satisfied smile as Sakura tilted her head towards the sun and let the rays warm her attractive face. The Genin had convinced Tsunade and Rin to give her the day off before team training began and now she was trying to relax a little, forget about all the pressures of a ninja's life and enjoy the moment. After the second exam finished, nightmares plagued the young medic's sleep for the first time since Sasuke's death. Visions of the forest haunted her for nearly a week, but they served as a harsh reminder of the realities she has to face as a kunoichi, and helped her realize that sometimes you had to appreciate the peaceful moments. Sakura came to a stop at the top of a hill and looked over a small valley of wildflowers near the outskirts of the city. The girl's smile became wistful as she remembered the time Ino first brought her here. But the pinkette didn't want to be dragged down by the bad memories that followed thoughts of their early friendship, so with a laugh she ran down the hill and into the meadow of flowers before letting herself fall to the ground. Sakura's momentum caused her to roll several feet until she came to a stop on her back. The pink-haired kunoichi let out a content sigh and tried to push everything out of her mind. It wasn't meant to be though. Her sharp hearing picked up the pitiful whine of an injured animal. After following the pained yips to a nearby stream, Sakura saw a small fox with a hook through its cheek. There was a steel line with multiple hooks going across the river and some had large chunks of fresh meat. She felt bad for the poor creature and started towards it. The animal started to struggle as she approached, but the hook cut deeper into its cheek and with a high-pitched squeal it stopped. The pink cat placed a calming hand on the nape of the fox's neck as her nimble fingers undid the knot holding the hook to the cable. The creature tried to make a break for it, but it had no chance of escaping the firm grip of its savior. Then Sakura gently cradled the fox so its paws were facing away from her and its mouth could only bite the tough sleeves of her shirt. The animal struggled in the grip for several moments but eventually gave up when it realized the futility of its actions. The medic barely noticed the squirming fox as she tried to figure out what to do. The animal could potentially move if she went too fast, meaning it could scratch or bite her and get free, but the main city was pretty far away. The girl's sharp mind came to a quick conclusion shortly after, though, as she remembered the Inuzuka's compound was a 10-minute walk from here if she took it easy. Deciding that was the best option, the Pinkette started towards the clan's home. As Sakura got closer, alarm bells started going off in her head, so she turned sharply on her heel and grabbed a wrist, reaching for her shoulder. Ouch! What the hell, Sakura? Let go of me. A sheepish smile momentarily spread across the girl's lips before her face took on an accusing look. What were you doing trying to sneak up on me? Kiba finished rubbing his wrist and returned the look. Well, this is my compound and I wanted to make sure you weren't trying to spy on my training. The boy trailed off as his keen nose picked up the metallic scent of blood and he saw the wounded animal nuzzling into Sakura's arm. The Inuzuka gave the Pinkette a surprised look before taking off down the path. Follow me. The Kunoichi hurried after him as fast as she dared, and it wasn't long before they came to a small building outside the main complex of houses. Kiba pushed open the door and yelled, "Hey sis, we got an emergency patient out here." An attractive brunette that appeared to be 16 or so stepped out from the back room and looked around in confusion until Sakura came in carrying the wounded fox. Her face took on a worried look as she gently took the animal and carried him into the examination room. The two younger teens sat in the waiting room chairs in silence until Kiba asked, "So how'd you stumble across that poor guy?" Sakura looked up at the feral shinobi before answering, "I was in a flower meadow trying to relax a little bit when I heard some whining. I followed it and found him hooked onto a big fishing line across a nearby stream." Kiba nodded absently before his eyes widened slightly. "That wouldn't happen to be the place I met you in, you know?" Sakura looked confused as she thought about it for a couple seconds, then the girl burst out in laughter. "Oh yeah, I remember that now. You came out thinking you were some sort of stud and tried to play feel me and Ino up." Kiba rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. "I wanted to be a vet, so I thought it would be a good idea to play doctor." The Kunoichi stared at him in disbelief and he looked at the ground dejected. "Okay, that was a pitiful excuse, but I was just a little kid." The Inuzuka looked up hopefully. "I've gotten better, right?" Sakura looked over the mollified shinobi and realized he was right. Kiba wasn't a little runt talking big anymore, he had grown up into a strong young shinobi. The boy showed how dependable he was in the forest and was always taking the well-being of everyone into account before acting. He was definitely a comrade she could trust. The girl smiled at the Inuzuka and he quickly returned it. "I guess you're right, Kiba." A few moments later, Hana walked out holding a happy-looking fox that had a bandaged cheek. The pretty Chunin smiled at the two before saying, "Well, he's good as new. I put dissolving stitches in and the bandage will fall off in a day or two after the wound starts to heal." The orange fox let out a cheerful yip and Sakura couldn't help but let out an "aw." The Pinkette looked up at the older girl with a hopeful look in her emerald eyes. "Do you think I can keep him?" Hana gave the younger Kunoichi a sad smile. "Unfortunately not. Foxes are related to dogs, so it's possible you could have tamed him if you found him as a kit, but now he's set in his ways and living in captivity wouldn't suit him. But it's not like he'd be locked in my house." The brunette Chunin raised her hand and cut Sakura off. "I'm sorry, but after most animals can't make the change after learning to survive in the wild. He'd be miserable if you tried to keep him, no matter how much you took him outside or how much attention you gave him." The older girl looked at the Pinkette's disappointed face and sighed. "I'll let you bring him back to where you found him though." Sakura nodded and carefully took the fox before heading to the door. "Goodbye, Kiba, Hana. Thanks for all the help." "No problem, I'm just glad you found the little guy." The pink-haired Kunoichi walked through the door after the older girl finished and she looked over at Kiba. "Not bad, little bro, but maybe you should ask her out." The boy started sputtering as his sister continued, "Don't make excuses to me, do it or don't." Hana walked in back as Kiba ran out the door. He saw Sakura quickly after and called out, "Hey, wait." She turned around and he continued after getting closer, "How about we hang out sometime after the finals?" The Kunoichi blushed momentarily and thought about the question as the fox looked back and forth between them. Her earlier thoughts about the boy rushed forwards and she said, "Maybe, if you impress me in the finals." Kiba smiled and gave the girl a thumbs up. "If that's the case, I'll definitely see you later." With that he turned away and Sakura giggled before taking the fox back to the stream. Cream and maroon-colored robes billowed behind the aged Hokage as he walked down the hallways of the new stadium Konoha built for this event with an escort of 2 Anbu. He had just finished greeting the daimyos of Suna and Konoha first, which is customary because they would be insulted if they had to wait for him to visit somebody else. The wizened shinobi figured that was a good thing too because they were already drinking heavily and the concubines were losing their fragments of cloth quickly. If he visited any later, the two might have been completely belligerent. Sarutobi stopped in front of a door with 20 men wearing different uniforms that signified their allegiance and waited to be let in. The doors slid open smoothly as the guards nervously shifted aside for the powerful shinobi, and he entered the room built for the daimyo of the smaller village. It was nearly 40 feet from the door to the viewing windows, 60 feet long, and 30 feet high. It was split into two levels. Both had tables loaded with various exotic dishes and different games for the men to pass the time between matches. The only difference was the bottom level had a hot tub next to the viewing window while the top level was normal seating. Like the other daimyo's booth, it had plenty of alcohol, and it was apparent these men were thoroughly enjoying it. The Hokage gracefully stepped inside and greeted the nobles who were on the first level while waiting patiently for the ones on the second level to come down. Of course they made sure to do it slowly as possible because they wanted to demonstrate their superiority over him, never mind the fact the old man could effortlessly kill all of them before the guards outside noticed. Of course he could kill all their bodyguards without them noticing that as well. Once the daimyo were all assembled, the Hokage began, "Thank you all for coming. Konohagakure no Sato is honored to host such great men as you. I hope you find the features of our new stadium accommodating. After receiving the first wave of ticket reservations, we realized it was necessary to build this or we would have been forced to turn too many people away. It also allowed us to create a more unique battleground for the team fights." Only the Ta daimyo was able to cover his amazement at the feat, the rest looked on in wonder. After several moments the Kuza daimyo coughed, "That is quite impressive, Hokage. I only wish my village was as efficient. The drought that has plagued my country was made worse when wildfires broke out recently. The hidden grass reaction was horrid." Sarutobi smiled inwardly as the Kawa daimyo chimed in after, "Yes, it seems this is a year of uncertainty. The summer was incredibly hot in my country and the temperature didn't fall too much in autumn. Ice caps in the mountains that feed the rivers running through the land of rivers melted and caused massive flooding. Entire towns were destroyed and it wiped out whole tracts of fertile land." The daimyo of Tsuki no Kuni chimed in from the back, "It seems the whole continent is getting affected. I've heard dams in Ta no Kuni had burst and bandits were moving into the region." Sarutobi turned to see the daimyo of Raizama Kusashiro gritting his teeth when the whole room began staring at him. The Hokage took particular pleasure in his anger knowing the man had teamed up with Orochimaru. He had read Jiraiya's report on the land of rice fields and had told Danzo to strike that one hardest. The aged leader couldn't help but be impressed by his old rival's results. "Excellent job leaking that information, Danzo." The bargaining power Ta gained after the large purchases they just made would all but disappear if it was discovered the country was facing desperate times. Eventually the Yamakusa surrendered to the silent pressure. "Yes, some dams that were built after the country's founding were neglected by my predecessors, the same men that left me without the funds necessary to repair them either. However, if the rumors about Yu no Kuni's challenges are correct, then my country's problems seem relatively insignificant." The daimyo from the land of hot water grit his teeth and prepared to continue the pissing contest the Ta daimyo had unwittingly started, but Sarutobi wanted to leave before it devolved completely. The room was tapped so he would learn everything anyways. "Once again I would like to thank all of you for gracing Konoha with your presence and I hope you find everything to your satisfaction. If you need anything just press one of the intercoms located throughout the room and ask. The same intercoms that will record everything you say." The daimyo all clapped and the Lord of Nami no Kuni stepped forward to say something. "Thank you for your hospitality, Hokage, and I would like to say I myself look forward to seeing such a unique final round. The fights should be most interesting and I can only hope the betting will be the same." Sarutobi bowed after the man finished while saying, "Thank you for your kind words, Daimyo-sama. I will take my leave and allow you all to enjoy the accommodations." After finishing, the Hokage walked outside before towards the cage booth as his Anbu materialized behind him. As the wizened leader walked, he couldn't help but silently compliment his old rival once more. "Excellent work, Danzo, making the minor villages look incompetent while impressing their daimyo with our strength will lead to increases in our funding. It's unfortunate most alliances are less valuable than the paper they are printed on. Hopefully the one with Kaze no Kuni proves to be different, but that too is subject to the whims of the daimyo." Sarutobi pushed the thoughts out of his head and walked into the cage room where his counterpart from Suna was already waiting. The older leader walked over and inclined his head towards the man as he sat down. "I hope your trip was easy, Kazekage Dono." The leader of Sunagakure nodded while facing Sarutobi. "Easy enough, Hokage Dono. I'm sure my trip was much more enjoyable than the leaders of the minor villages who were attending." The older Kage agreed. "Yes, I was just talking to some of the daimyo about the disasters that have struck their countries. It is quite unfortunate, but one cannot control the whims of nature. Yes, we can only do everything possible to help." Many countries have hired out Suna teams to help assist recovery efforts. Sarutobi pulled a pipe from his robes and began packing it while answering, Konoha has teams out in the field as well, we can only hope to ease the suffering of our allies as best we can. The Kazekage chuckled darkly at the statement before turning to look out over the field as the contestants began filing out onto the large field and the crowd began cheering wildly. The arena floor was 300 feet by 300 feet and largely flat, except for the various rolling mounds that were spread across the ground at random intervals, and the large cliff that stretched halfway up the east wall and extended out 50 feet. In the center of the arena was a flat circle with finely trimmed grass that had a diameter approaching 75 feet, which didn't provide any one village an advantage, but there was another 25 feet of thick grass 12 feet high that extended out from the circle which separated it from the other features, and the ground wasn't even in there. On the north side of the stadium a series of streams made the surrounding ground a mud pit and ran into the wooded area on the west side, then the woods eventually turned into a sandy field with small dunes on the south side. As the participants entered the circle at the middle of the battlefield, a proctor that had a senbon needle in his mouth and straight brown hair that went to his shoulders appeared in a puff of smoke. He was wearing the standard Jounin outfit appeared and raised his right hand to silence the screaming audience. The cheers continued for another half a minute before it started to die down, and then Jounin began projecting his voice. My name is Shiranui Genma, I am the proctor for the third exam and now I will explain the rules. This tournament shall consist of battles between teams, and under no circumstances can any participant climb above the wall while competing. The fight is over when all three members of a team are unable to fight, that means they are unconscious, have been forced to surrender by the other team, I declare them unable to continue, or they have been killed. To determine the fighting order, teams have been given a seed based on when they entered the tower, a bracket of the fights shall be displayed now. Everyone in the stadium directed his or her view to the screen that was suspended above the center of the battlefield as it lit up with the bracket detailing the final round. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.